All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our final session of the day. Before we get going on this session, I want to take some time to not only say thank you to the Utah Department of Transportation, Move Utah, and TravelWise as a presenting sponsor for the 2021 Utah Bike Summit, but also recognize UDOT as a critical part in getting the $35 million appropriation in this past legislative session as well. That money will not only require a 20% match versus the 40% match that has been seen with other funding options, but UDOT will be responsible for recommending how that money will be spent. So thank you everyone for joining this session. We're grateful to have UDOT representatives from their teams here presenting with us today. Heidi Goedhart and Stephanie Tomlin. We're also grateful to have Dan Bergenthal here today from Salt Lake City Transportation. We look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts and comments on how we can potentially continue safe, healthy, and active streets initiative beyond the pandemic. For those that are joining us and watching, you can add your questions into the chat, and we will address them at the end of this session when the speakers have finished presenting. So with that, take it away, Stephanie, Dan, and Heidi.
Great, thanks so much, Trilby. So as Trilby mentioned, we're here, the three of us are here today to talk about the Open Streets Initiative, which was a Salt Lake City and UDOT partnership in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But we want to focus both on short-term kind of strategies, as well as talk about some of the long-term solutions that came out of these strategies. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We just did introductions, but just quickly again, I'm Stephanie Tomlin, Transportation Planner for UDOT Planning, as well as the Board Chair for Bike Utah. Heidi?
Yeah, I'm Heidi Goedhart with the Utah Department of Transportation. I do all things biking, walking, micromobility, and ADA. I'm also wear another hat as a board member for the Bicycle Collective. So definitely love bikes, full-time bike commuter right here. So thanks for having me.
Great, and Dan?
Yeah, I'm Dan Bergenthal. Yeah, and I work for Salt Lake City. I'm a transportation engineer. I work mostly on bicycle and pedestrian safety, also vehicular safety as well, and been involved with a lot of trails and bicycle facility implementations in Salt Lake City over the years, and just glad to be here today.
Great. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. This is going to be presentation format, meaning we're going to step through some slides, but then we're definitely going to leave time at the end for questions. So just a quick outline on the screen of what we're going to talk about. We'll start with an overview of the Safe, Active, Healthy Streets Initiative, kind of what it is, why it was started, and what streets were designated. Then we'll jump into a data discussion. I love data, so I always love looking at it. And so this is a little bit on, did people use the lanes and how did they use them? And then we want to spend a good portion of time at the end talking about next steps for Salt Lake City, as in, there was a lot of effort put into these safe, healthy, active streets. What's happening moving forward? How are we kind of keeping the momentum alive and using this as a tool in our toolbox, or transitioning from these lanes to a more permanent fixture? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dan. He's going to talk about the Safe, Healthy, Active Streets Initiative.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. So in late March of last year, during the beginning phases of the COVID-19 lockdown, members of the city transportation team began discussing what we might do to help residents who were told to only leave their homes for essential needs, with one of those needs being exercise. And almost overnight, our parks and trails became very crowded, and we were concerned that people couldn't social distance properly on our 4 to 5 foot wide sidewalks. And so we came across the idea of opening streets to community recreation while maintaining access to local traffic, and thought that this would help ease the load on our city parks and trails and help residents have recreational opportunities closer to their homes. So in April and May, we opened 10 streets for a total of 10.1 miles. And those are the streets shown on this map here on the screen. The streets were selected based on street walkability, community visions for their streets, specifically many of the streets that were proposed in neighborhood byways in the PED Bicycle Master Plan were looked at. Ease of implementation, geographic equity, and input from a community survey. So all the streets but one were 2-lane residential streets, which were shared by motorists, bicyclists, and pedestrians. The other roadway, which was Knight South, was a 4- and 5-lane roadway, and on that roadway, we just closed the outside lane for bikes and pedestrians. So access was maintained on all these streets to homes, businesses, on-street parking, deliveries, and garbage. Next slide. So this is a photo of Knight South. You can see here we've got the outside lane closed down, and you can also see the signs there for maintaining the business access. People are still parking on the roadway there. And on Knight South, we worked together with UDOT to come up with this barricading plan and the signage plan. For the rest of the barricading plans for the other 9 streets, the city did all those in-house. Next slide. So our typical barricading plan included 2 signs at every intersection leg, which includes a bicycle pedestrian warning sign and either a road closed to through traffic or a road closed local traffic only sign. Each sign was attached to a type 2 barricade using zip ties. And the city purchased the signs, but we rented all of the barricades that we used. Next slide, please. So at mid-blocks, we provided a sign that was printed on corrugated plastic that explained the rules of the road, or of the shared street. And this was printed in both Spanish and English. Next slide, or next slide. So here's the rules of the road sign up close. I don't expect you to read all this, but essentially it says, slower traffic move to the right to allow faster traffic to pass on the left. And be nice to each other, share the road. That was the message we were trying to get out there. Share the road, be nice. So how long did this last? Well, we told people that this was going to go until either the Utah Moves Plan Together plan level moved to green or by July 1st. And this was based on the amount of funding that we had available. So all these roads, they went in April and May. So they were going to go through May and June. Well, the pandemic, green never reached the green level. You probably all remember that. And so what we had to do then was, as our funding was running out, we started removing the signs the end of June, beginning of July. But due to neighborhood requests, the mayor's office was actually able to receive or find additional funding so that we were able to keep the signs and barricades on a few of the roads that were the more popular ones. And the signs and barricades, the last ones came out on 8th East and N Street on November 2nd, just before the snow arrived. Next slide. So at the same time that the Stay Safe, Stay Active Streets program was going on, the Downtown Alliance and the city teamed up for downtown Salt Lake City Open Streets. And the purpose was to help out the businesses downtown and to activate Main Street while maintaining social distancing. So we opened the sidewalks for outdoor dining and entertainment and closed the east side of Main Street to automobiles so it could be used as open space for pedestrians and bicyclists. This lasted 4 weeks, September 17th through October 10th, each Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And the northbound travel lane was closed then from about 12 p.m. to about 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. Street entertainment and programming was scheduled from 6 to 10 p.m. And the first week, we only were able to close between 3rd and 4th South on Main Street, but the last 3 weeks it was closed between 3rd South and South Temple. Next slide. Here's another photo on one of those evenings. So regarding the street entertainment and programming, we had street performers, and at the Galvin Center and Exchange Place frontages, they had a DJ, a band, and even an inflatable screen with movies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to talk a little bit about the data that we collected.
Great, thanks, Dan. So the reason we wanted to incorporate this section talking about the data is, there was a lot of effort put into these lanes, and so there's definitely a desire to understand, like, did people use them? Were they out there? Like, and did it achieve some of the means that we were hoping to, which is allow for, safe social distancing during a time, of the pandemic that was a lockdown, and, how did traffic flow around them and things like that. So I only have 3 slides to just go through and talk about some of the highlights of the things that we picked out in the data. So I'm going to talk specifically about the data collection effort on 9th South. So as Dan mentioned at the beginning, there were many streets, 10 that were done in Salt Lake. 9th South was the one that actually had the 2 outside lanes that were closed for vehicle travel and opened for active transportation usage. This one required a little bit more complex of a traffic control plan. And as such, we wanted to make sure that we were out there kind of observing, both for the sake of understanding the usage, but also how did vehicles interact with this area? How did buses, et cetera. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the map of where we did. So the purple lines show the temporary lane, so from about 3rd East to 7th. And then in the red circles, those are the count locations where we physically went out there, a person physically went out there with a clipboard counting and observing. So that happened at 4th East and 6th East, 6th being the entrance to Liberty Park. And then at 5th East and just between 5th and 6th, there were camera locations that we were able to review the footage after the fact. So before I get into the data, I want to talk briefly about like the layout and how this all worked, right? Because we broke it into like 4 segments that we were considering: the transitions, the traffic obedience, parking, and the transit operations. So you can see some photos up here that really show what the signage looked like and how we used cones and traffic control devices to really channelize and control where people were going. Overall, by and large, we were really impressed with how well people were utilizing the facilities and flowing in the correct direction. Traffic was still able to access the parking, as Dan mentioned, and transit. It worked really well. The buses would open and close their doors in the lane and allow for people to get in and out of the buses just fine. So in terms of data, we were really pleased to see that overall, the usage was high. We had, we went out and did counts on May 3rd, 6th, and 9th of 2020, and we, counted over 1,000 users, both in the temporary lanes and on the sidewalks. Just a couple, of the greatest hits from the data. We definitely noticed that the temporary lanes were mostly used by people on bikes. You can see in the pie chart, the blue represents cyclists, and that's around 81% of total users were people on bikes. We did notice anecdotally that groups used the temporary lanes most. So that's families, people walking and running together or biking. Generally, there was more use at the park. Like I mentioned, the 6th East location, it was at Liberty Park. So we noticed people were kind of using that as a spot to transition into the lane. Usage rose throughout the day with a peak use in the evening. That's the bottom 2 graphs you can see on the slide show that the usage kind of went up as the day progressed. And then Saturday and Sunday far and away had the highest use, even though we did also count on a weekday. So with that, I'll just pass it back to Dan to talk really quickly about the rest of the data collection, and then we're going to get into next steps.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. So for the 10 streets that were in the Stay Safe, Stay Active initiative, city staff went out twice in the evenings, and we all went out there with our clipboards. All 10 of us, we all went to each street, and we counted bikes and pedestrians, and also noted their position, whether they were on the sidewalk or on the streets. And our overall top performing streets by the numbers were 4th Ave, 8th East, Wasatch Drive, and 6th East. 4th Avenue, as you can see there, consistently had the most pedestrians using the street. The pedestrians are showing up in orange there. And the numbers shown on this graph do not include bicyclists and pedestrians that were using the sidewalks. This is only the ones that were in the streets. So there were a lot of people out there, and this is, you know, only 2 hours in the evening on a weekday. So next slide. So moving forward, what's next for 2021 with open streets in Salt Lake City? Well, next slide. Building on last year's success, this summer the Downtown Alliance plans to close the northbound and southbound lanes on Main Street from South Temple to 4th South beginning Memorial Day, May 27th, and hopefully continuing every weekend, Thursday through Saturday through Labor Day in September. This will depend on funding, but they're pretty confident that they're going to be able to come up with what they need. And it's going to be open the same hours as last year. And we're kind of using this as a test case, Main Street. And if it's really successful again this year, then the city is considering the possibility of doing this at some other locations within the city. So we're hopeful that this is going to be very successful because it's a lot of fun. Next slide. So with the Stay Safe, Stay Active Streets program last year, this gave Salt Lake City residents a chance to experience their streets in a new light, basically to use them for something more than automobile thoroughfares. In many cases, this sparked their imaginations and increased support for more permanent solutions to making streets safer, comfortable, and attractive for people walking, bicycling, scooting, or rolling through their neighborhoods. So as I already mentioned, some of the streets selected for this program were proposed as neighborhood byways in the Salt Lake City Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan. So we're now using the momentum created from last year's program to help move forward with implementing some of these neighborhood byways. So last summer, right after we removed the signs and barricades from Emory Street, we began construction on the Poplar Grove Neighborhood Byway project, which currently includes improvements on Emory Street and Cheyenne and 15th West between 4th South and the 9-line trail. Project includes shared lane markings, custom byway signage, bicyclists and pedestrian crossing improvements at the larger intersections. And this design right here that we're looking at is for the Emory Street and Indiana Avenue intersection. And you can see here the shared lane markings, and there are some bicycle ramps taking you up to the corner where we have flashing lights, the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. And we also have high visibility crosswalks put in here. Next slide. So this is the intersection of Cheyenne Street with Indiana Avenue. Kind of a similar setup here. We have the high visibility crosswalk, shared lane markings, bulb outs, and the rapid flashing beacons here. Next slide. This is a photo of the completed project from last summer. This is that same location, Cheyenne and Indiana Avenue. So I'll now turn it over to Heidi to talk about another neighborhood byway project that we're working on.
Yeah, so given the popularity on the east side on 800 East, that was definitely like a highly used route. Children playing in the street, doing chalk drawings, wheelchair users being able to like walk side by side with their family and friends. And we decided to provide some technical resources and some consultant assistance through UDOT and the Move Utah program to help Salt Lake City figure out some permanent solutions similar to the ones that Dan just showed you for the Poplar Grove neighborhood in Emory. So we are kind of in the planning process, so I'll give you an update on what's happening there. We've done community outreach and a survey. You can see some of the responses with demographics and where people live and their income. So go ahead to the next slide. we have some visioning that's happened with the corridor. We've kind of compiled a neighborhood stakeholder group, if you will, and identified what some of the strategies for that roadway should look like based off of people that actually live on the street, commute on the street, and own businesses on the street. And so we've figured out perhaps what some large placemaking, public art might look like, in addition to what the transportation kind of improvements or park space improvements might be along the corridor. Next slide. So ultimately, a lot of the design work that we're doing and cultivating with the city right now and with the residents is kind of aimed at how do you make these neighborhood streets convey something different, right? We really saw this cool atmosphere in the summer months and in the fall of neighbors getting together and chatting and being able to social distance and have kind of more space than being confined to their yards. And that's kind of what our planning process is aimed at doing. So next slide. You'll see that, we're kind of wanting to address some key crossing opportunities. If you're familiar with 800 East, it does cross some very significant east-west routes. So we're looking at crossing improvements and then, some placemaking elements and some ways to kind of add permanence to some of the temporary infrastructure that was in place with Stay Safe, Stay Actives. So that's a little bit of a highlight to the planning process that's happening on 8th East and kind of the last of our presentation. So if we have any questions or discussion, I think we're happy to field that as a group, and really excited to share our presentation today at the Bike Summit.
All right, thank you guys. Yeah, I really appreciate that. This is a great idea. I know a number of cities responded in this manner, and I think as communities, we are all looking forward to moving forward with the same idea in the future, pandemic or not. I have a couple of questions for you. Number one, I personally come from a smaller community here in Utah. Lots of rural communities clearly suffered the same sort of issues in the pandemic as well. How can communities, particularly those of other sizes, replicate these kinds of projects, with fewer streets in their communities and need for still critical, transportation movement throughout the city, but yet balancing that with the need for people to still get out?
That's a great question. I can maybe try to attempt it and then someone else can jump in. It's kind of with the safe and active streets, it's all about finding your own flavor and what that looks like and how it needs to adapt to the needs of the local community. I did a little bit of road tripping this fall, and Pendleton, Oregon, of all places, they had removed their parking on one of their little main streets and put in parklets and extra dining space, similar to the examples that Dan showed. And they were able to still allow for deliveries. They actually let the delivery trucks just park in the middle of the street and made people that had to kind of get around go on another route. And so I think it's just a matter of trying to figure out, what works in that community. You don't have to have massive barricades if the community is really small and they're okay with putting up some planters. Ketchum, Idaho, they literally just moved out planters that they had for some of their urban design work on their sidewalks, right? They just physically removed those and put them in the middle of the road to block cars. And so I think that there's a lot of kind of creative capabilities as long as you get the business owners on board, you have meetings with your council, and you set a vision, be open to ideas and changes along the way, and just know that it's an experiment in the works, and it can lead to great things. So
great. Yeah, Stephanie or Dan, do you guys have any comments on that? If not, I've got a follow-up question too.
I just was it looks like Dan, there's a question for Dan in the chat, but really I was just going to echo what Heidi said. I love that idea of use the resources that are available within the community, right? I think Salt Lake, because they had a fact with the barricade company, that was able to be done somewhat quickly. But in the case, I love the idea of planters or other small items that you could use that might achieve the same ends, but are doesn't have to kind of look the same to keep it more affordable.
Before we get to Dan's question, I have a follow-up on that. What would be some ways to advocate in any size city for more funding for projects like these in the future?
Yeah, quick builds. Dan might have a little bit more of an inside knowledge on how the city has advocated for that money. We kind of saw the benefit with providing resources, consultants and engineering and planning work at the DOT, just because, you know, we're trying to move people, not just cars. And that includes moving people recreationally on our streets because they have nowhere else to go, right? We saw a lot of car trips get shifted to people just walking and biking in their communities for recreation instead of driving to the gym or driving to karate or whatever people are doing, right? And so we saw the need to help accommodate that increase in use. So, any insight, Dan, on the funding, maybe?
Well, the funding that we were able to use was COVID-19 relief funding, that the city emergency funds that came in. So it made it really nice for us. You know, if that hadn't come through for us, I think we would have had to, we couldn't have done as many streets, but we, you know, just using, you know, the staff that we have on hand, we could go out and do some of this ourselves. You know, we have barricades and we have signs, but yeah, I mean, be creative, but it's kind of it depends on the situation for each city, right? On what kind of funding they have available and how creative they can be.
Good. We've got some questions from the chat coming in. One specifically for you, Dan. Was any tracking performed on accident data on the active streets for pedestrians or automobiles?
We do collect all the data for that. We haven't gone back and looked at it yet, but if we will be doing that this year. We always look back at all the pedestrian and bicycle crashes and read every one of them. So we will be looking into that, but we have not done that yet. But I'm not aware of any crashes that happened as a result.
I think we had someone fall on a scooter, and it was like self-reported, like EMS showed up, or something of that magnitude. And we were really closely monitoring crash reports and everything at the UDOT intersections with like 900 South and any of these other facilities, and didn't really see any negative impacts. Like, we were definitely paying a lot of attention to it on 900 South with the lane closure. So
yeah, if we would have heard of something, we would have gone out immediately to see what happened. We just didn't. We weren't notified of any.
The next question that we have is, what can be done in Utah to elevate the signing and pavement markings on neighborhood byways so that they are easily recognizable? Berkeley, California has huge bike markings on the pavement and barriers that prevent through car traffic.
do you want to take that one, Dan? Or I can speak to it a little bit.
Yeah, I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, we use, you know, the standard markings that that are in the MUTCD. We use a lot of the shared lane symbols, and I mean, that's pretty much our standard, what we have been using. We haven't done any of those giant ones like you see in some of the cities. But not saying that we couldn't. But right now, the standard, we're just following the standards that are, you know, NACTO or MUTCD.
Yeah, and we do have Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City kind of have visions for like a signage protocol, like signage along the corridor that conveys to motorists like that corridor, the flair of the community with different colors that can, you know, be MUTCD compliant with the signs. So we have hopes and visions of getting those up and running. So
great. I do see one more question. We still have plenty of time. In a frame of reference for Main Street in Salt Lake City, were there any key takeaways for other communities to try with temporary closures?
Takeaways. I think, Dan, do you want to talk about like weighting your signs down? We had several big wind events. I think that would probably be the biggest one.
Oh, was this question just for Main Street though, or was it for all the streets?
Main Street, or I guess all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say all of them. I'm guessing kind of like, what are the lessons learned, so that when communities do try and replicate this, we don't go reinventing the wheel and, like Heidi said, having our signs fly into the next county when the next big wind event comes. Is there some kind of, shared knowledge that we can have?
Yeah, I think coming up with a better barricading plan where the barricades are either weighted or they're just able to withstand these wind events. Nothing would have withstood the one wind event that we had last year, though, right? That was a disaster. But we also had many other storms that came through, and every time the wind blew, it seems like our signs were tipping over, and it created a lot of maintenance for us. And also, with attaching the signs to the barricades, I think use wire to do that, not zip ties. We went through a lot of zip ties. Wire would work much better. Let's see. If you can have more public input at the beginning, that would be better, because we just didn't have time to get the community involved. And so we were criticized a lot for that because we didn't have the chance to do that. But it was an emergency situation for us. We just did it as quickly as we possibly could. We did notify the community councils and the businesses as well as we could, but we didn't have any community meetings. So if you're going to do it, make sure you get everybody involved so that everyone knows what's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. We're still in the pandemic enough that the conversation is fresh enough that we want to have these conversations and, follow up on these great ideas. But yet, things have settled down enough that we've got time to kind of plan. And to your point, I think getting community input is a great idea, because definitely if you can get community buy-in, then you see a lot more usage.
Indeed. Yeah, our experience with the 900 South Lane closure was definitely a lot of business engagement and figuring out what their individualized needs were. It was definitely a dynamic and evolving situation. We had, what was the coffee shop at the time? They literally set out milk cartons and transitioned their parking area into like a drive-through for pickup. And so we had to accommodate that into some of the design work. And so I think just like the engagement, talking, we're not going to know about these problems unless we get our feet on the streets and talk to the people. So, yeah. Socially distant, of course.
Awesome. Well, I think we are about out of time. Dan, Stephanie, Heidi, thank you so much for participating in this session. And once again, thanks to UDOT in particular for being a presenting sponsor of the 2021 Bike Summit. If you three have anything else to say, I welcome any last comments. Otherwise, you are free to leave. I'm going to stay on and do some daily wrap-up comments. So I'll give you a second if you have anything else.
Thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having us here.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Great, thank you. Thanks. All right, see you guys. I'm going to continue on. For everyone listening, stay tuned for just a second because I will continue talking. So I really appreciate all of our panelists today joining us for these great conversations that we had at the Utah Bike Summit on our Infrastructure Day. In today's conversations, we talked in the All Abilities Bikeway session with Blair and Amanda about what the difference is between design and experience for adaptive cyclists. Amanda reminded us that there are many forms of cycling, and rather than addressing every problem, we should try and focus our solutions on those that address everyone's needs. If you missed the session or any of the other sessions, be sure to check them out afterwards by going to the agenda and make sure you have view previous sessions on, and then press the view recording button. In the session, using data to create more equitable infrastructure, Chris Wiltie shared his findings from using Strava Metro, Streetlight, and Eco Counters, and what they mean for creating more equitable infrastructure. Chris commented, if we invest in safe infrastructure, people will use it. And we have proof now that this planning theory works and is true. On our mountain bike trail use panel, we had representatives from trail managers and organizations from across the state talk about the expanded usage that has affected their trails. One main topic that surfaced during this conversation was the power of volunteers, but yet also acknowledging that although volunteer time is free, it takes funding to organize and supply tools and training for those volunteers. And as you just saw, we wrapped up our day with a conversation on continuing safe, healthy, and active streets beyond the pandemic with Utah Department of Transportation and Salt Lake City Transportation. So I have just a couple of other reminders and announcements. Tomorrow will be the last full day to bid on the silent auctions. So be sure to check in on the auction site. Often throughout the day, I have a feeling that things are going to get hot as we near the time that we announce our winners. So go keep bidding on all of the great items that we have. We are incredibly grateful to everyone who has joined us today in our efforts to create this unique Utah Bike Summit experience this year. From the silent auction to our free youth session tomorrow and the advocacy workshop day on Thursday. Here are just a few more of our awesome partners that we're happy to have on board. Special thanks to Utah Department of Transportation, Move Utah, TravelWise, Draper City, Salt Lake City Bicycle Advisory Committee, Wasatch Front Regional Council, AECOM, the American Planning Association, WSP, Mountain Land Association of Governments, Get Healthy Utah, Horrocks Engineers, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, Office of Outdoor Recreation, and Salt Lake City Division of Transportation. That's what we've got for today. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you.